I would now like to introduce our next speaker. Jack Kavanagh is a resilience and performance coach who is motivated to help others live more aligned, courageous, and fulfilling lives. I would now like to hand over to Jack to speak with us here today.
Hello, hello. I am absolutely delighted to be here and to follow up from two incredible other speakers and on the back of some wonderful presentations from all of you around the world. So I feel very privileged to be here right now. Um, and particularly because I'm truly passionate about people and their stories. I think that diversity that we have within this group is absolutely beautiful. Um, and so I'm really passionate and excited about the learning and the work that's been done and celebrated in these awards. And it kind of reminds me again and again that there's magic in each one of us. And that gives me a sense of hope. A few years ago, and this will resonate because today I've been asked to speak on resilience and this idea of personal leadership and what we can learn in those veins from children. And a couple of years ago, I was at a place in my life where I was really at a crossroads. I certainly didn't feel resilient. I felt like I wasn't leading myself in any direction that I wanted to go. My life had taken a dramatic turn, and I was feeling this rising sense of quiet discontent, a sense of dis-ease that if I didn't check it would become disease. And I sat down with pen and paper and I started to write, and this is what I came up with. There is no right or wrong path, just a series of events that either gives us a flavor of what it is that sets our heart alight or dampens our soul. What I do know to be true is that in a life that is not always a smooth ride, and a world that is more disillusioned, disconnected, and full of people wearing masks than ever before, the bravest thing that any person can possibly do, despite the challenges they may face, is to bring their authentic selves to the world, and that is when the magic will happen. So I've been asked to speak about resilience and personal leadership, and I'm definitely going to start in a place that you wouldn't expect. As I looked around the world looking for guidance after a challenging period in my own life, which I'll tell you a little more about in a moment, I started to look at leaders all over the world, the way that they operated, the things that they did. And the more I looked and looked and looked and read, and found myself in different leadership positions in smaller ways at younger ages, the more I realized and became inspired that so many of the things that we need in leadership were learned as children. In fact, children have some of the best personal leadership characteristics of anybody I've ever met. And the beauty about that is that each one of you have learned or tapped into so many of these traits growing up. So just bear with me for a minute. Children are endlessly curious. They ask question after question until they get an answer they're happy with. They're unapologetically honest in that they say what they mean and they mean what they say. And they're resilient to failure and they're persistent with their goals. Just think about how many times they miss before the food ends up in their mouth, or how many times they fall before they take the first steps. When they're tired, they rest well and then they go again. They're decisive in that they know what they want and they ask for it, oftentimes when they don't have all the information. But probably most important of all is that they're more emotionally connected than so many of the adults that I've met, in that they actually laugh when they're happy and they cry when they're sad. There's none of the smoke and mirrors that we've all learned. We would say that they're being real, and you hear Edwina talking about that, the naming of where you're at, of the emotions and expressing that. But then us more intelligent adults come along and we start to teach these young people that are you and I, and we say things like, no, don't touch, stop that, be careful, it's too dangerous. And we instill almost a sense of fear in them to protect them from themselves and importantly to make them more socially acceptable. And if this is done well, that young person learns amazing boundaries, their curiosity is stemmed and fueled, and they have good structures around them. But when it's not done very well, what we actually end up doing is dampening the magic that those little kids have in them. And ultimately, they grow up to be you and I, and our ultimate aim becomes to rediscover that, to uncover those parts of ourselves again, those parts that came alive with wonder and awe, with curiosity, with emotional connection, with a sense of persistence and resilience in the way that we approach things, that we believe that we could learn through doing, uh, and all of these kinds of things. Ultimately, to approach life more from a place of love and being willing to give things a go than a place of fear and of being scared to be caught out. So these young people are born completely vulnerable. And they're born into what the Navy SEALs would call a VUCA world. And Vincent mentioned going on your mission. Well, VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It describes so many of the environments that we exist in the world today, be it in research or business, be it in our personal lives, or ambitions that we have. The conditions are often volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And when we're born, hopefully we have some nurturing people around us that help us to learn to navigate, to stretch and grow in response to the challenges we face. And we get very good at managing the day to day as we do so. We get very good at managing the day to day challenges and expanding our capacity little by little over time. And as we do when we move into our teenage years, we get so good at it that an awful thing can happen. And that's when we fall into a comfort zone. And we've all been there at different times. The thing is, though, that at some point or another, challenge will present again. Challenge will present in our adult lives just as it did in mine. It will show up in our personal or professional realm. It'll show up in our relationships. It'll show up in our financial situation or the social situation. And the thing that's different as adults than as children is that so many of those traits that we learned, those innate responses, aren't so innate anymore. And instead, we have to assume responsibility to choose our response, to be courageous enough to do so again and again. And so, for an adult, developing resilience and a sense of personal leadership relies on us finding the courage again and again to show up for ourselves in small and bigger ways. And that's exactly what I was called to do in my own life. 8 years ago, my life changed in a way that I couldn't possibly have imagined. I was just after finishing my first year in college, studying pharmacy in Trinity. And at the time, water sports and sports of all kinds were my ultimate passion. And I was particularly fascinated by windsurfing. And I trained to become a lifeguard, and I would spend on a windsurfing instructor, and I would spend my summers on the beach instructing young people after college. And I remember going down to the west of Ireland to this wild place. And on one of the first days down there, cycling off to the beach completely by myself. And I found myself on a beach called Ellie Beach. And as I sat there on the sand, the only footprints on the beach were my own. And I looked out over the breaking waves as the sun was setting. It's one of these ideal scenes just etched into my memory. And I caught myself smiling. You know when you catch yourself in a minute, just in the moment. And I realized that for the first time that I could remember, I was age 20 at this stage, that I was becoming comfortable with who I was, that I was answering lots of the questions that I had for myself as a teenager, that I was proud of the work that I'd put in to get where I was and excited about where I was going. Little did I know that only a number of weeks later, my whole life would be turned upside down. That all of those skills that I learned as a child would be called upon. Just after I turned 20, at the end of that summer, I went away on holidays with some of my very best friends to Portugal. On the first day, as I'd done so many times that day, that week, that summer, I ran down a beach. I dived into the water over a wave, not realizing how shallow it was. My head collided with the sandbank, and in that moment, I broke my neck. And in a moment, a life that was just a minute before was just a distant memory. As a result of that accident, I have about 15% muscle function. My shoulders, my biceps, and my wrists. I have no finger function. I have no movement below my armpits, and I use a wheelchair. That could have been the end for me, but the following day, as I woke up in intensive care and gradually became aware of my surroundings, I remember counting the 8 screws in the light fitting above my head. I remember becoming aware that my head was in a metal cage that made me look like Frankenstein, that I had tubes going down my nose and my throat to keep me breathing and hydrated. And as I did, I became aware and I noticed that one of my best friends was walking around the bottom of my bed. And he was smiling but crying. And I couldn't speak at the time, but I mouthed the words, "It's going to be okay." I don't know where that came from at the time, but it was a recognition that I would get through this in some way. And a really interesting thing that I was told later was that around the same time that I said that, my parents were on a flight over to Portugal to come and see me in hospital. And my mum was asking the question, why Jack? Why would this happen to Jack? And my dad responded by saying, well, why not Jack? Why should this have happened to anybody else on the beach? All of you are remarkably talented. It hasn't happened by accident. Life rewards effort. And each one of you have applied yourselves. You have come up and stretched yourselves again and again and again. And life will continue to provide opportunities for you to do that. Life is a series of problem solving again and again. And I asked the question, why me, when I was faced with that challenge? And oftentimes it's a natural response. It's part of the grieving. It's part of coming to terms with the challenges we face as individuals and groups. And I soon realized that that made me the victim of the situation. So I flipped the question to why not me? And that was a very empowering thing because it put me back in the driver's seat. I decided to adopt an approach of optimistic realism. And what I mean by that is facing reality as it is, dropping my assumptions, as so many of you as researchers have to do, of staring reality straight in the face, and then of choosing to take an optimistic outlook, to understand what can I do with this and how can I improve things in some way for myself and others. Vincent talked about all of you as leaders, and he's absolutely right. And this is the approach that it takes. It takes self-awareness, it takes perspective mentally, it takes a connection to values and a sense of purpose. It takes connections with others and the relationships we have, and managing our energy physically, mentally, emotionally. And repeatedly coming back to those small choices that we make day in, day out. the choices we make as to how we respond to the challenges that we're dealt in life. I was flown back to Ireland. I nearly didn't make it, but I did. And a number of weeks later, I found myself in rehab, and my first job became to breathe without the aid of a ventilator. I then had to go on to learn how to navigate the world using a chair. My whole self identity was challenged. But I think the only person that wasn't surprised when 13 months later I found myself back in college, living away from home, at the time with an awful lot of support, was me. And it was at that time that I had to embrace the skills and traits that we all learn as children. The traits of curiosity, of honesty, of persistence and of resilience, of resting when you're tired, of emotional connection, of applying a growth mindset, and ultimately, as children, allowing yourself to see the magic that is still dormant within you. Over the years, it's brought me to all sorts of places. I've been involved in all sorts of interesting things. At the moment, I sit on the board of the National Disability Authority in Ireland, trying to level the playing field for people of all abilities, be they sighted or not sighted, be they on crutches, in a chair, or on their 2 feet, trying to level the playing field for those with neurodiverse abilities, and so on. I'm also involved with a leadership institute, and my main body of work is as a healthcare professional and as a coach. I'm passionate about health. I'm passionate about working with people to be healthy mentally, emotionally, and physically, because in that state, people are better equipped to express more of the magic that they have, to explore their potential to make a mark on the world for the better. And when we equip ourselves and others with the skills, the environments, and technologies to be healthy in mind, in body, and in our hearts, we give them the capacity, the chance to build capacity, to tap into inner strength and resilience. As Edwina said, to allow people to flourish. And importantly, I'm passionate about this idea that when the going gets tough, we need to have built a tribe around us that we can lean on. A tribe of peers and mentors, just like you've got in this group, that we can lean on, that can remind us of the strength that we have when we don't feel it, and the magic that they see in us when we're struggling to see it ourselves. To remind us of all the incredible things that we learned as children. It's certainly not been an easy road. There have been many dark nights of the soul when I questioned, and yet I would always say that each one of us is stronger than we know. Look to children to inspire you when the going gets tough, and keep showing up for yourself and the people around you, because it's remarkable what we can achieve together. So, in whatever you face in your lives as you step out into the brave world, um, building on the incredible work that you've all done here, creating a sense of meaning, as Vincent has said, and aspiring to have a remarkable career in the same way that we just heard from Edwina, I really wish you the bravery to begin, but importantly, the courage to continue, because the world deserves to see more of the magic that each one of you have within you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jack, for speaking with us here today. Do you have time for a question?
I do indeed, yes.
Brilliant. Edward Foster asks, as well as managing your own positivity and resilience, have you had to manage the positivity and resilience of your loved ones as well with regard to their concern and worry for you?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And, in the early days, um, what happened to me, and so many of us have traumas in our lives. My natural response was to be okay for everybody else. And I put on a strong face. And at a certain point, I had to allow myself to feel it fully. Um, and that allowed everybody to be more human. I think when we wear, it's probably not the ideal phrase to use in COVID times, but when we wear masks, as in when we uh, pretend that things are going well or that we have it all figured out, we don't create the opportunities for collaboration, for people to support us, and for us to get the support that we need. And as I said at the end, really showing up and being more human allows everybody to give what they need at the right time. Um, and so I absolutely do think that I had to create the environments for others to express where they were at and to support them because they were doing so much supporting of me as well. So there's give and take.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I have another question from Hannah who asks, how do you deal with the possible and actual judgment from others?
Yeah, wonderful. You know, everybody is looking at the world through different lens. Um, and for me, now as a wheelchair user, for example, if I take that, um, there's a lot of it's not ignorance, but it's just not knowing. Um, people have perceptions about all of us based on where we're from, what we look like, how we speak, how we get around in the world. And really, the approach that I take is that another person's opinion of me is none of my business. Um, and if I am reliant on others' uh, opinion of me, their voice becomes stronger than my own perception of myself. What I do have to do on a regular basis is to dispel fear for others by letting them into my world. And what I mean by that is, for example, when I turn up at a meeting, when I was involved in the business world and so on, to look people in the eye, to make it okay that there is a guy who uses a wheelchair who's not often seen in a boardroom or something, um, and to make it okay to show people my competence and importantly to put them at ease, because so much judgment and comparison comes from a fear of the unknown. And to be honest, we're all more similar than we are dissimilar, and that was said earlier by somebody else as well. So yeah, but coming from that approach of somebody else's opinion of me is none of my business, and then understanding, well, how can I educate them and dispel the fear that they might have about the difference.
Thank you very much for that. I have one final question for you from an anonymous attendee asking, how do you know you can reach out to others for support when you're afraid of being a bother or a burden to them?
Wonderful question. And you know what? It is absolutely okay to face struggles, to have the doubts, to question yourself, to wake up in the middle of the night and wonder what the hell you were doing, and not know the next step. That is absolutely part of being human being. Um, the most beautiful thing is when somebody opens up to you and lets you into their world. I think we often feel that when we open ourselves up and share something, that we are being vulnerable, and that's our perception on it. But if I, for example, ask you to think about the last time you saw someone sharing a challenge or a struggle or a doubt or a hard part of their life, our perception as an onlooker is, wow, that person has remarkable courage. It takes bravery to do that. There's huge strength in that. Um, and that opens the door for the other person as well. Relationships in any way are built by us trading little bids of vulnerability. It's if we constantly exist on this superficial and only exist around each other when things are fantastic and great and fine and everything is brilliant, we have no depth to those relationships. And so real meaning was spoken about earlier, and strength and sort of tenacity in relationships come when one person chooses to take that step of reaching out and saying, you know what, I'm struggling at the moment, or I'm a little bit lost, or I don't feel okay, and I'm not quite sure why. These things are powerful. It doesn't mean that they're easy to do. And just to normalize it for you that no matter what you might face, millions and millions and millions of people have had those same feelings, doubts, concerns before. And we often think that we're completely alone, but really we're not. And the only way to understand that is to let someone in.